Welcome in, everyone, to the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Football Podcast presented by Reality Sports Online. My name is Kyle Yates, and I'm your host, and I am joined today by my good friend Marvin Elequin of the Fantasy Footballers and Dynasty Nerds. He can be found on Twitter at FF_Marvin E. Marvin, welcome into the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Football Podcast. We've had you on the main podcast. Now we're talking some Dynasty here. We've got you on. Really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me, and I can't imagine a better topic than Dynasty Football, one of my favorite formats of fantasy football. So appreciate you having me on, man. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. And we've got a really fun topic that we're going to be talking about here today as we look at startup drafts, right? Because that's kind of the season that we're in as people move into the preseason and closer to the preseason and stuff like that. Rookie drafts are pretty much wrapped up. So we're going to be moving into startups, and we wanted to really focus in on helping people that have like a pretty solid base of knowledge for fantasy football players and everything like that, for players for fantasy football, But then once we get past like round 16, man, it can get really tricky to find out or figure out who you're even selecting. So we're going to lean into our experiences here. We're going to look into some ADP, dive deep into some players and pointing out some players that we like later on in startup drafts. So we're going to get into that in just a second. Before we do, though, I want to remind everyone that we've got a giveaway going on courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction. That is a Jonathan Taylor signed Colts jersey. To enter this giveaway, all you have to do is go over to Apple Podcasts or CastBox, leave a review for this show, then head over to fantasypros.com/dynasty contest. Fill out the short form there and then attach a screenshot of your review, and you are automatically entered. Again, that is a Jonathan Taylor signed Colts jersey courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction. Make sure that you just take 3 seconds out of your day, guys. 30 seconds out of your day. It's not going to be a ton. It helps out the show in a huge way. If you are a listener of the podcast, we greatly appreciate you taking some time out to do that. It would help us out in a big way. All right, Marvin, let's get into this here. The format of what we're going to do here is we are just going to walk through Sleeper recently released some ADP, some Dynasty ADP, right? And so looking at average draft position here for Dynasty leagues, courtesy of Sleeper, the fantasy football platform. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at each round based on their ADP, and we're each going to highlight a player here that we think that we're going to call it a startup draft steal. These guys that we really like in this range based on each round. So let's start here at round 17, okay? We're down past, round 16. We're at round 17 now. Let's throw it to you here. Who is a player in this round, in this realm of ADP, that you really like when you're on the clock in your startup drafts?
Yeah, so one of my favorite guys to draft and even acquire in trades even is, at this point, Russell Gage. And admittedly, his ADP may have jumped already at this point. But in round 17, I absolutely think he's a steal, considering where he's at in an offense that's, top 10 in pace of play, top 10 in passing rate. And we know that their defense hasn't really improved this offseason, so they're going to have to pass the ball. Going to play a lot of catch-up, I would assume, here. And, of course, Kyle Pitts is there, and he's going to take on a lot of those targets that Julio Jones left behind. But Russell Gage, he has a great baseline of 110 targets even last year. I believe that could jump even just slightly. And we've seen him without Julio Jones average around 12 PPR points. It's nothing to write home about, but it is a great baseline, someone who you can plug in even just for one of those bye weeks when you need to fill in a flex spot. I think he can give you at least a baseline and give you some solid production out of the flex.
I mean, that's incredibly important because these guys that in this range, right, and it's going to get worse as we go on through this ADP, where we're saying, I just want guys that can contribute, right? Because rounds 1 through 16, those are the players that are kind of locked into starting roles, players that we know what they're going to be. And then there's Russell Gage here sitting in round 17. And it's like, okay, I might not have the ridiculously high ceiling that some of these other guys, but I know what I'm going to get. I know that I'm going to get that solid baseline that you mentioned that I can plug him in as a solid bye week option or a flex in full PPR formats. The ball has to go somewhere here in Atlanta now, especially with Julio Jones out of town, Kyle Pitts, an unproven rookie for everything that we believe that he can be. The ball's still got to go somewhere, and Matt Ryan and Russell Gage have that chemistry there. So absolutely love the call there. I'm going to point out someone who definitely does not have that safe floor, right, of a Russell Gage, a solid baseline, but I am going to say someone who I do think has the talent to make an impact down the road, and that is Bryan Edwards, the Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver. Now, Edwards coming out last year, 3rd round pick, I really liked him. I think that he fell a little bit because of his injury concerns, and we saw that pop up last year. We saw him deal with injuries that prevented him from being able to make an impact on the football field. But look at what Las Vegas did this offseason. They did not invest anywhere else on this offense as far as a receiving option. Yeah, Kenyon Drake out of the backfield, but it's Henry Ruggs, it's Bryan Edwards, it's John Brown, right? And John Brown has a very specific role, and Hunter Renfrow, so there needs to be this possession style receiver who can make some jaw-dropping catches, which we know that Bryan Edwards can do. He's going to have a role in this offense. So in round 17, I think that there is still a very low floor with Bryan Edwards because of the injury concerns, but I'm willing to take that shot there with Edwards because of what his upside is. All right, let's go on to round 18 here. There are some really, really interesting players in this range. Who are you going to throw out here as that player that you're eyeing in this round?
Yeah, so for me, the guy that caught my eye here is Chittarius Tutu Atwell, who by far is one of the best first names in this draft class. But when you look at what he did in college, I mean, I know the knock on him is his size, and he was one of the toughest guys for me to rank pre-draft because of the size concerns and what you see on the field. But then he was so productive in Louisville. I mean, look at what he did as a sophomore, just account for 42% of the receiving yards market share, super productive, well over 1,200 receiving yards, and scored a lot of touchdowns too. Did the same thing in his senior year, of course, or his last year, junior year, though wasn't quite the season that we would hope for, but still very productive relative to the team. And, I told myself with him specifically that I would just let the draft capital kind of dictate the rankings for me, where if his production profile outweighs the size concerns, the NFL will draft him accordingly. And sure enough, he got the draft capital with a second-round draft capital here with the Rams, and they drafted him with their first pick in this draft class. So it's significant draft capital for me. And so I'm going to trust the coaching staff here that they have a plan for him. And in the 18th round, grabbing a wide receiver with drafted in the second round with that production profile, that's someone who I just want to grab. And sure, there's some risk because it is a crowded wide receiver core there, but you never really know, right? And so someone who's drafted that early, he could have the opportunity, and I believe he could have some productive games even this year.
It's really important to remember that we're in the 18th round of a dynasty startup, right? So if we are talking about Tutu Atwell in the 12th round, 11th round, like that's where I'm going to be really, really, I'm going to be very hesitant, and I'm going to give you some pushback on that. But when we're in the 18th round, yeah, he does have all this lining up for him to say, like he's got the draft capital. Obviously, Sean McVay has a clear role for him in mind. My only question to you would be, do you think that he can, in this receiving core, with Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson now in town, do you think that he can have this impact? Like, is he going to see enough targets here to even be fantasy relevant? Or do you think that, there is a path for him to carve out a significant role in this offense?
It's tough to do so immediately. I do agree because you do have, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are the 1 and 2 here. I don't think there's any question there, but I do think that wide receiver 3 role. Now, they did draft Van Jefferson last year, so with similar draft capital. So it was really questionable for me why they dipped at the wide receiver position again and grabbed a second one. But, does that mean they saw what they had in Van Jefferson, didn't like it, and so they went with Tutu Atwell? I do wonder what their plan is there. It's a little questionable, but, I got to trust at least the fact that, what he did in college plus the draft capital kind of translates into something here. And like you said, in the 18th round, I'm willing to take the risk. But, I'm not too excited. I definitely wouldn't advise putting him in your wide receiver 2 slot anytime soon.
Right.
But you never know, even after this year, how things shake out. So 18th round, I'm willing to take the risk there.
Yeah, we're throwing darts, right, at this point of the draft, and it's only going to get worse as we go on, right? But I think with the 18th round, someone who I would even be willing to throw this dart, quote unquote, in the 14th round, 13th round, and that is Savon Ahmed, the running back for the Miami Dolphins. Now, I do think I'm going to go on the record here and say that I do think that Myles Gaskin is going to be the starting running back here in Miami for an offense that I think is going to take a major step forward this year. However, do we have that like guaranteed and locked up that it's going to be Myles Gaskin? Because the difference in ADP here of average draft position from Gaskin to Savon Ahmed in the 18th round, that is just ridiculous for me. So if there is the path here that Ahmed becomes the starting running back, because when Gaskin came back last year, it was because Ahmed took over that workload. It was because Ahmed was dealing with an injury. So we never really got the full clarity that who is the main running back, who's going to be the lead ball carrier here in this backfield when both of these guys are healthy. Again, I do think that it is going to be Gaskin, but the percentage chance of that happening, dictates that I am willing to take this shot on Salvon Ahmed here in the 18th round, because what happens if he does end up being the starting running back? I loved Ahmed coming out of Washington last year. So I've already got the, the love for him here of the talent, and I'm willing to buy into that. And now you're telling me that I can get that with the potential that he is the starting running back in the 18th round. That is totally enough for me to buy in here and say, I'm going to take Salvon Ahmed in this round every single time. I might even be willing to reach a round or two for him. Let's move on to the 19th round here. Marvin, who do you got?
So I have Jacoby Myers in round 19. Someone who I love drafting in the later rounds of startups, or even branching outside of that in best ball or redraft leagues. I think his ADP is so low there, but his upside and what he could be in this offense is pretty intriguing. Just looking at what he did last year, had a slow start to the season. They didn't really give him the opportunity right away, but from week 7 onward was the wide receiver 4 in target share, wide receiver 4 in air yard share, and with that opportunity, he was super efficient as well, wide receiver 8 in yards per route run. So, they gave him the opportunity. They tried to give it to N'Keal Harry. That didn't really work out. And Jacoby Myers was just productive from then on. You love to see that from a young wide receiver, just receiving that opportunity and then running with it. And so obviously this is a different team now with Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, your guy, right? And Nelson Aguilar. But they need another wide receiver out there. Even if they run, a bunch of 12 personnel, they'll need another wide receiver out there. And I do believe opposite of Nelson Aguilar, it could be Jacoby Myers. And he's someone who, even in his rookie year, when given the opportunity, was very productive and had some solid games there. Now, obviously it'll be interesting to see which quarterback starts here, but I do think that, in the 19th round, someone who was productive last year, even with Cam Newton, I think he's worth a shot here in the 19th round.
Again, it's the same argument with Russell Gage. It's that solid baseline. Like, we know what Myers can bring us as a solid floor. Now, I don't think that he has the upside, the potential of some of these other guys in this range, but you do know that he's a little bit of a safer bet because we've seen him do it before, and we know that he is going to have a role on this offense. Now, just a matter of what that role specifically looks like with, is he playing in the slot? Okay, well, if they're running primarily 12 personnel, that limits his overall opportunities. There's a lot of things there to be sorted out, and that's why he's going in the 19th round of startup drafts. Like the call there, because I have had Myers on plenty of my dynasty teams, been able to plug him in bye weeks. Love the call there. I'm going to go with OJ Howard here in the 19th round. And this is not necessarily because I think that for what he brings you in 2021, right? Because this is an extremely crowded offense. Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski. You got Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones, Giovanni Bernard out of the backfield. Like, the list just goes on and on. But Howard and his talent, athleticism, what he brings to the table, there's a potential that once his contract is done here in 2021, that he moves on and hits free agency next year. And he gets a starting role somewhere else where we can see him start to take on an expanded role. So I know that dynasty managers and fantasy football players have been waiting for OJ Howard for however many years now, but the talent and athleticism still is there, enough for me to take that shot in the 19th round. If I am needing that tight end 2, tight end 3 on my roster, that I'm just drafting them and seeing what happens, I'm going to be patient with OJ Howard here. I know I'm probably not going to get a ton in this upcoming year, but I do know that he is going to get another opportunity next year if he doesn't re-sign in Tampa Bay. So thinking a little bit towards the future here with OJ Howard. Let's keep this moving. Let's go to round 20. Who are you going to throw out?
So I have here another guy that should have a lot of opportunity ahead of him. And at this point, we're just trying to find guys with opportunity, at least for me, trying to find guys with upside here. And that's Drayquan Smith with the Saints and with Emmanuel Sanders and Jared Cook leaving. I definitely think there's plenty of opportunity here behind Michael Thomas. And I know there was some buzz about them being interested in a couple of receivers in the draft. Terrace Marshall, I believe, was one of them. And so that would have been a great landing spot for a rookie. But the fact is they didn't draft one. So Drayquan Smith is by default, at least for me in my projections, is the wide receiver 2 here. And what intrigues me with him is that he was in the slot last season about 50.7% of the time. Jared Cook and Sanders, they were both in the slot around 25 to 27% of the time as well. So there's all that opportunity now in the slot available. We've seen Jameis, assuming he gets the starting job here, have a great connection with his slot receivers. I believe there's some opportunity here for him to be productive. Again, not anything that will win you weeks necessarily. He might have that potential. We're not sure yet, but I'm not banking on it. But I do think he can at least be a flex receiver, someone you can plug in bye weeks, and it's plenty of opportunity there with with Jameis Winston, who loves to throw the ball. So I'm taking a chance on him as someone who's only 24 years old and could have some upside going forward.
So you sent over your list of players before I had a chance to sit down. And so I sat down, looked at round 20, and we've got guys in this range of Kyle Trask, Jamar Jefferson. We got a couple of kickers. We got freaking Tim Tebow ahead of Drayquan Smith here. Like, what are we doing, people? And so I have got Drayquan Smith as well on my list because, one, I really do like Drayquan Smith as a Dynasty startup steal here later on. But then also because in this round, there is really no one else that I'm willing to look at. So Drayquan Smith, again, it's the argument. Like, the ball, someone else has to step up in this offense outside of Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. Can it be Adam Troutman? Yeah, I think so. I think I really like Adam Troutman heading into this year. But also Drayquan Smith, we've seen the flashes. That's just been an argument of Drew Brees getting the ball his way and, looking outside of Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. So if it is Jameis Winston, we've seen him do magical things for fantasy football receivers in the past. This is a swing for the fences pick. It's costing you nothing, and I think that the payoff could be really, really big here with Drayquan Smith. So I'm doubling down here in round 20 with you. I'm going Drayquan Smith as well. Let's go to round 21. Marvin, who is up here for you in round 21?
All right, so it's getting a little gross here, right? We're starting to get to the rounds where we're just not super enthusiastic about many of these guys. But, in round 21, the guy that stood out who could be a starter immediately for your teams is Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, there are a couple guys going later that I would probably take ahead of Ryan Fitzpatrick. But what I like about him is that he will be productive this season. And so if you decide to go young at quarterback early on. You go for a Zach Wilson, who might start the season slow, a Trey Lance, who might not be the immediate starter, though he probably should be, but they might opt to wait things out with him. Fitzpatrick is a great bridge quarterback for your dynasty teams. And last season, he had his ebbs and flows because of coming in and out of the lineup, but he was a QB1 5 out of the 7 games he was a starter last year, averaged 22.4 fantasy points, super efficient, QB4 and catchable pass rate. So he's an accurate quarterback. He just needs the opportunity. And now he's in Washington. I mean, he's got a plethora of weapons there with McLaurin, Gibson, Samuel, Logan Thomas. I mean, plenty of guys to produce there, and he's the perfect quarterback, in my opinion, for that team. And I think they'll have a pretty good run this year, maybe even make the playoffs. So I think they're going to, push for that, and he'll be productive in some competitive games. So I'm excited to see what he can do, and I definitely think he could be not a long-term option, but at least an option at least for this season, maybe even next year.
This is the perfect example of knowing your team and knowing how to construct your roster, because like you said, with those perfect examples of Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, even Justin Fields, if you end up taking them here and this is a 1 QB format, right? So Ryan Fitzpatrick is not going in the 21st round in a Superflex league. But,
right.
If you do take one of those guys as your QB2 in a dynasty league, well, you know that you're probably going to need someone else there to bring some stability. And that's what Fitzpatrick is going to bring to your roster this year. People are thinking about dynasty, especially if it's their first time playing, and they're like, well, I don't want Ryan Fitzpatrick because he's not going to be on my roster. He might retire next year. That doesn't matter. Like, you're getting him here in the 21st round. This is a player who next year you can just let go to your waiver wire in preparation of your incoming rookie picks. So being able to get Ryan Fitzpatrick here as that QB, that stable QB option for you makes a ton of sense, especially when you did go a rookie quarterback early on who you have high hopes for, but you know that you're going to need to bridge that gap there. Fitzpatrick is the perfect example. For me here in round 21, it's a Larry Roundtree, the running back out of Missouri who is now with the Los Angeles Chargers. And Larry Roundtree, 6th round pick, does not have the draft capital to his name. I really liked his tape coming out. Ray and I talked about him here on the podcast when we were doing our running back, scouting series and everything like that. I really liked his tape. And then he goes in the 6th round, and it's like, oh, man, all right, well, that's kind of a death sentence. But then you look at the situation here in L.A., you know that it's going to be Austin Eckler there as that, space running back, obviously a threat out of the backfield as a receiver. But then it's Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly, who showed us next to nothing last year. And then it's Larry Roundtree on this depth chart. There is a significant path here, just like Savon Ahmed, for Roundtree to step up into a starting role, right? That 1A, 1B pairing there with Austin Eckler. So here in the 21st round, I'm willing to take that shot on Larry Roundtree to see what happens. There's a very good possibility that he gets cut because he's a 6th round draft pick. Listen, it's a very, very strong possibility. But there's also the chance here, and I'm going to swing for the fences, that he gets a starting role. So take the shot there with Larry Roundtree in round 21. All right, let's keep moving here. Round 22, Marvin, who do you got?
So I have DJ Dallas here, round 22. Someone who, is buried under just a couple of running backs there. I mean, he's got Chris Carson or Rashad Penny ahead of him, and you do have Travis Homer probably in the mix as well there. But injuries have been an issue in the past for both these running backs, and I think we just even got some news today that Rashad Penny had surgery on his foot again, if I read that correctly.
So on his knee, yep.
His knee, okay, well, just as bad. So that's not ideal whatsoever. And so knowing that, and Chris Carson hasn't been the healthiest, though he's been productive when he's on the field, DJ Dallas could step into, just a 15 opportunity role once again. And we saw glimpses of that last year where he wasn't the most efficient guy, but he still finished as the RB3 in weeks 8 and week 9. He was RB20 as well. So he has the size, build, and skill set to be a 3-down running back, in my opinion. Wasn't the most efficient guy last year, but at this point in the draft, I'm looking for guys who could have the opportunity. And in this offense, one where they're, you look forward even, and Rashad Penny is not under contract next year after they declined his 5th-year option. Carson signed a 2-year contract, but his second year actually has a minimal cap hit, so not sure what they're going to do there. Dallas could have some opportunity here, and so in a backfield that hasn't been the healthiest, I think he could find himself in a situation this year where he might be thrust into a workhorse role or like a 15-touch role at least. So that could be worth something in fantasy.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the point where we're looking for opportunity. And so I'm going to say Amir Smith-Marset here, the wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, coming out of Iowa. He's a rookie wide receiver, so people who, the casual Dynasty player probably doesn't even know the name, but Amir Smith-Marset here is someone who popped for me on film, someone who I really liked his film. Really weird situation in Iowa, wasn't really able to utilize his full skill set. And now there's positive news coming out of Vikings camp that he can push for this wide receiver 3 job here in Minnesota. So while, again, it goes back to the New England conversation and Jacoby Myers, like the amount that he's going to get onto the field here in Minnesota, which runs a ton of 12 personnel, which is 1 running back, 2 tight ends on the field, is going to be probably very slim, especially with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson ahead of him on the depth chart. But with the future here with Adam Thielen, we don't know how much longer he's going to be able to play. He's got the injury history. He's starting to near the end of his career. He's still incredibly productive, especially around the red zone. But the future here for Smith-Marset, he can bring that wide receiver 3, capability, like the Minnesota Vikings wide receiver 3, not a fantasy football wide receiver 3. He can bring that to the table this year, and then potentially next year he can build on his experience and step into a starting role opposite of Justin Jefferson if Adam Thielen is no longer with the Minnesota Vikings. So again, it's a little bit of a dart throw, a potential here, like down the road future pick, but it could pay off here because I like his talent and he's got the opportunity down the road. So Amir Smith-Marset, the wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. Let's keep it moving. We got round 23 here. Who is on your mind here as someone that, you're looking at the names here of like Donovan Peoples-Jones, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Darden, Trey McKitty. Who is someone in this range that you were looking at saying, like, I want to add them to my roster?
Yeah, so I'm going to switch to the tight end position here. I'm going to go with Hunter Long, Miami Dolphins tight end, who I actually like quite a bit in my pre-draft process. Grade actually is my tight end 3 above Brevin Jordan. They were pretty close, both of those guys. But what I like about him is his skill set as a receiver. A solid route runner, natural receiver. There's someone who can run up the seam and threaten the defense in a variety of ways. And was relatively productive in college as well. Accounted for 27% of his team's receiving yards in 2019, had a 22% dominant rating in his redshirt junior year, his final year there. And about 60% of his receptions went for a first down, according to NFL.com. So he was productive, was a go-to receiver in his offense, and received third-round draft capital that essentially entrenched him as my tight end 3 in this class. And so I know Mike Gesicki's still there, but he did not receive an extension yet. He's not under contract, I believe, next year. So there is an opportunity here if they're looking for a receiving tight end that Hunter Long could be their guy going forward. He might not be the guy this year because Gesicki's going to dominate those snaps. And they run 2 tight end sets, but I believe it's Smythe who's going to take a lot of those, the second tight end role there. So he might not be a play for this year, but if you can grab him in the round 23, stash him in your taxi squad, we know having a dominant tight end or a productive tight end can make a difference in your lineup. So for me, it's Hunter Long, someone who I believe could have some upside going forward.
Yeah, we're now in the range of taxi squad players, these guys that you're just wanting to throw the darts on and see what happens. And especially at the tight end position,
Mm-hmm.
you know that you're going to have to be patient. No matter
Mm-hmm.
what, in this range especially, you're going to have to be patient. And so with Hunter Long, I do like the call here because he was someone that impressed me with his tape. The numbers are ridiculous like you laid out there. So he does have the potential here. Now it's just, okay, can he carve out a role for himself on this roster? I think you're going to have to be patient, but it could pay off down the road. For me, I'm going to go with Jalen Darden here, the wide receiver out of North Texas, now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. For me, I loved Darden in the pre-draft process. I actually had him graded out above Elijah Moore from Ole Miss. So I love Jalen Darden and what he brings to the table with his speed, athleticism, his elusiveness. He's just so much fun to watch on tape. And now he gets this, I think, third round draft capital here with Tampa Bay. And this is not a really solid choice here for this year, right? As someone who I think is going to bring a lot to the table this specific season. But Chris Godwin on the franchise tag might not be back in town next year. Antonio Brown, we don't know what's happening with him next year. So I think with Jalen Darden here, you're bringing him in onto your roster here in the 23rd round, and you're just saying, I'm going to see what happens. I think he'll get some scheme touches here. He's going to get some experience. Again, he's coming out of North Texas. That's a big jump to the NFL. So get him some experience this year. You're going to have to be patient. But next year, I do think that he can carve out a significant role on this roster. So I think that I'm going to be adding Jalen Darden everywhere that I can, and the 23rd round is fantastic value for him, in my opinion. Let's go 2 more rounds here. Let's try to make it through and just fly through these ones here. So rounds 24 and 25. Who do you got here in round 24?
Yeah, this was a tough one.
It's really tough.
Yeah, not feeling too excited about any of these guys in round 24, but I'd probably pick Wayne Gallman here. Someone who's in a running back friendly, fantasy friendly Shanahan offense, right? And with Jeff Wilson's injury, he could have some opportunity here ahead of him. Was productive last year for the Giants. I mean, he was from week 7 to 14, he was essentially their lead running back, RB12 in opportunity share and RB12 in PPR per game in that time span. So he was productive. Now they obviously force fed him touches and there's no guarantee that's going to happen here, right? In this offense in San Francisco,
right.
But he took advantage of the opportunity. That's all you can really ask for from the guy. And so, yes, Trey Sermon's there. He's got the better draft capital, obviously, and they just drafted him for a reason. And Mostert is still the RB1. At least that's what I'm projecting here. But you never know. They use multiple running backs, and I think Wayne Gallman has shown enough that he could be productive if given a few touches here.
He's the same name that I wrote down because you're looking at, Puka Williams is going above him.
Right.
Tyler Johnson's right behind him, James Washington, Giovanni Bernard, like these names in this range, man, it's pretty gross. So Wayne Gallman was the player that this is I am standing so far back from the dartboard and I am just closing my eyes and I'm throwing it and seeing if I hit the bullseye here with Wayne Gallman. Yeah, for all the reasons that you mentioned, he did really impress me last year. He was someone that I really didn't want any piece of from a fantasy perspective previously. And then watching back through his film and watching what he did when he stepped in for Saquon Barkley, he impressed. He impressed me a lot. So now in San Francisco, there is the path here for him to be at least relevant. I don't know what that upside is, but again, in the 24th round, you're not finding another running back that you're going to feel super confident drafting and starting. So Wayne Gallman worth a shot here. I had the same name written down. Let's go last one here. Let's go lightning round. Round 25. Who is the player that you're looking to? Let's just close this one out.
Going with Harrison Bryant. Someone who had some productive games last year, was relatively productive at Florida Atlantic in his college career. And in Cleveland, they have David Njoku as a free agent in 2021. Hooper's contract isn't a lock anyways either going forward. So there's some opportunity here, and he showed that he could be productive last season as well. So once again, a taxi squad guy, but someone who, if you punted tight end, you could grab him and he could have some upside maybe this year or more likely next year.
Yeah, I'm going for that tight end upside here as well. I'm going with Chris Herndon, and this is not because I am a Chris Herndon fan or believer or anything like that. I really have never been on board with Chris Herndon, but there's no one else here playing tight end for the Jets this year. It's got to be Chris Herndon in an offense that I do think is going to take a step forward. And rookie quarterbacks love to have that option over in the middle of the field. So Herndon, he's shown flashes, obviously. And do I think that this is going to be I might end up cutting Chris Herndon when the start of the season comes around and there's a more attractive waiver wire option in my Dynasty league. But I mean, it's worth a shot here in the 25th round because of the upside and what he brings. If I wasn't going to mention Herndon, Bryant would be that next guy, that guy who I feel like can take that step forward, especially because of David Njoku out of town next year, and there is another offense here that runs a ton of 12 personnel. So even if Austin Hooper is in town, Harrison Bryant can be that guy even this season. He can be that tight end too and beat out Njoku. So love the call there, man. That is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much to Reality Sports Online for sponsoring today's show. Marvin, thank you so much for jumping on, man. Greatly appreciate your insight and just being able to take some time looking through rounds 17 through 25 of a Dynasty startup. That is no small feat, so I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to chat.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Always a pleasure to jump on a podcast and talk with you. So thanks so much for having me. And appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. And a reminder, you can find him on Twitter at @FF_MarvinE. Guys, this is the last episode with a guest. The next Fantasy Pros Dynasty Football podcast that you hear will be with the new co-host of the podcast. So super excited for you guys to get to meet the new co-host. That's all I'm saying. It's going to be a surprise. I'm really excited for where we're heading. Make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast. Make sure that you head over, enter in that Fantasy Pros Dynasty giveaway there, that contest for the Jonathan Taylor signed Colts jersey. Again, you can do that by heading over to Apple Podcast or CastBox, leaving a review for the show, then heading over to fantasypros.com/dynasty contest. Fill out the short form there and attach a screenshot of your review. That is going to do it for today's show. For Marvin Elequin, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time. Looking for useful content, fantasy relevant information, and the data that can help your team win? Then make sure to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. And while you're at it, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook @FantasyPros so we can help you dominate your league all season long.